Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be talking about the murders of Michael Tatalovich, his friend and roommate Jonathan Gilbert, and the attempted murder of their friend Michelle Machusko. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Dossier. Are you familiar? If you're not, don't worry. You're about to get familiar. Dossier is a fragrance company that creates luxury scents, but at a fraction of the luxury price point, where a lot of luxury perfumes can cost anywhere from 50 to hundreds, with an S, hundreds of dollars. How dare they? Dossier's perfumes range anywhere from $29 to $49, and they offer you deals like bulk deals. When you buy 3 or more bottles, you can get a certain percentage off and free shipping. I know it sounds too good to be true, but I promise you it is real. Now today I have 2 scents that I want to tell you about, right? Expose you to, and these are both scents from their Dossier original line, which means they're not inspired by like any existing scents. They are original scents, hence Dossier originals. Now the first scent here I have is the scent Ginger and Grapefruit Zing, and it's from their Wellness collection. And when I tell you, bliss starts with a sniff with this one. This is the type of scent that's designed to just give you a burst of energy. It has, the grapefruit and the ginger in it, which, duh, it's in the name. But it also has things like lime, melon, and patchouli, and it is, in a word, lovely. The other scent I got is from their Speakeasy collection, and this is Bubbly Spritz and Bitters. This is another one that's kind of got like the citrus scents. I have a type here, as you may be able to tell. This has notes of orange and mandarin, but it also has vanilla, yeah, that's a word, vanilla and juniper berry. It's very fresh and light. They actually both are very fresh and light. This one and this guy over here that's hiding off camera. They're both fresh and light because I very much have like a type right now. So anyways, I'm just super into it right now. And you know what else I'm into? The fact that Dossier is a cruelty-free fragrance brand. Most fragrance companies are not, heck, most luxury brands in general are not cruelty-free. So if you really love animals, like I do, and you want to smell good, like I do, I think Dossier would be a good fit, and plus, they are, again, a fraction of the price. Anyways, guys, Dossier is offering the members of the Brat Pack a discount with the code BRATTERSTEIN at checkout. You'll get 10% off of your new favorite perfume. If you click the link in my description box, use the code BRATTERSTEIN at checkout. I mean, they're already so affordable that it's already a pretty good deal, but if you want to save a little more money and try any of the scents that I told you about today, or just, peruse and see if there's anything that's more catered to your tastes, I'm sure you'll find something that you will enjoy. So make sure to click the link in my description box and use the code BRATTERSTEIN at checkout to get 10% off today. And now I want to say a big thank you to Dossier for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Dossier that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. Alright, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that I actually stumbled upon months ago. So this is how my process goes. I'll be researching a case. I will come upon another case, which is how I learn about a lot of the more obscure cases. I'm like, oh, what is that? I read an article and I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's what happened here. I was looking into another case, came upon this case, copied it, like the link to the article, emailed it to myself so that I could look into it later. And what's funny is, not funny, haha, funny like, of course, is that while looking into this case that I'm telling you about today, I came upon another case that I'm filming next week. It's just like a domino effect for me. But the point is, I discovered this case months ago. I emailed it to myself to look into. I just recently looked into it. And when I tell you, to read about this case was so heartbreaking because it is so senseless and it seems to have happened for no reason. And it left so many people devastated by the loss of these 2 young people and almost a 3rd young woman. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on. And the question of the day is this, what do you believe was the motive for the murder of Michael and Jonathan and the attempted murder of Michelle? Because it seems so random, and the people who knew the perpetrator here said that this was so not in their character that I just want to know, what do you think happened here? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murders of Michael Tatalovich, his roommate Jonathan Gilbert, and their friend, the attempted murder of their friend, Michelle Machusko. Our case today begins on a cold Tuesday night in January of 2008, and this is in a place called North Fayette Township in Pennsylvania. It's just after 11:30 p.m. when police receive a call of shots being fired at an apartment complex. This was the Settlers Place Apartments, and it led police to go to unit number 408. And this was a unit that police had never been to before, never for noise complaints, fighting, nothing. When officers arrived at this apartment complex, they found that it was a secure building with like one of those door buzzers. So they just started pressing all the buzzers until finally a tenant in the building let them in. So they go up and they go to unit 408, which was on the second floor. And when they get there, they bang on the door to announce their presence. And they hear somebody on the inside saying like, "Who's there?" And once they say like, "Hello, it is us, we are the police," they hear this person like shuffling around inside, and they hear what sounds like a heavy piece of furniture or something being pushed in front of the front door to block it, and they later found out that this was like a big chair. After hearing the chair being pushed in front of the door, they heard the sound of like rustling blinds and the sound of a sliding glass door being open. So they're like, "Oh, this homeboy's trying to leave." So they run around to the back of the building, and that's where they find that this man, yes, is trying to escape by jumping off the second floor balcony. So they stop him. He raises his hands. He throws away this loaded gun that he has on him. And the officers are like, "Okay, like, what's going on here?" And he says that there are 3 dead people inside that apartment. And when officers ask him, like, "Did you kill them?" he simply says, "Yes." He actually said specifically, quote, "I killed them all. Make sure you guys don't shoot each other. They're all dead anyway." This man was H. Paul Visnansky, and he had just murdered 22-year-old Jonathan Gilbert, his friend 20-year-old Michael Tatalovich, and had attempted to murder Paul's then fiance, now clearly ex-fiance, 20-year-old Michelle Machusko. But fortunately, she had survived. So now let's go back a little bit and figure out how we got here. I will say right off the bat that unfortunately there isn't a ton of backstory on this case. It seems like this is the type of case that was very publicized locally when it happened, but not as much nationally. So there aren't a ton of articles, and a lot of the articles that used to exist online are no longer there. They've just been like wiped from the internet, which is so annoying, but that does happen with some cases. But I did go through newspapers.com and I read like every single article I could find. So I will tell you everything I was able to learn. So let's actually start today with H. Paul Visnansky, who I'm just going to call Paul. That's how he was referred to in the, I don't know what the H stands for actually, but he's just referred to as Paul in the publications. And at the time this took place, he was 23 years old, and he was a rural carrier associate. Like, he was employed as a carrier associate for the USPS, United States Postal Service, which basically means that he's on call, works for the USPS, and is on call to go and deliver mail to like rural areas. Now, when these murders took place, it was rumored that Paul was a student at Robert Morris University, which is where the victims of this story attended school. But this apparently was not true. It was reported that way, but then they came out and they were like, no, he didn't actually go there. He was at one time enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh with an undeclared major, but at the time of the murders, he was not going to that school anymore. But when he was going to that school, apparently he was very big into like paintballing. Apparently paintballing was like a big part of his life in general. He was like a 10-year member of the American Paintball Players Association, and even in tournaments. And he said that like doing this, being a paintballer and shooting, gave him a big adrenaline rush, which I will be honest, sounds pretty ominous to me. But from everything I've read, Paul wasn't like an ominous guy. People who knew him, like that talked about it after, said that he wasn't like a bad guy. He was a friendly guy, an even-keeled guy. People who knew them said they were happy to have known him. And people who knew him and Michelle as a couple said that they were like a really good and happy couple. People didn't seem to see any red flags in him. Well, okay, it's not that there were no red flags, there were just no dangerous red flags, because shortly before this crime took place, Paul had changed a little bit. I guess he had had some traumatic experience in his life where a good friend of his named Jared had actually taken his own life. And after this happened, there was a shift in Paul and his personality and the way he treated people, particularly with his girlfriend, Michelle. All of a sudden, he started to get really possessive, really jealous. He was convinced in his mind that Michelle was cheating on him. And it was very strange for people because prior to this, they had been like a super strong couple. There was nothing that is public, that is known, that happened that would make him all of a sudden switch like this towards her. So apparently Paul and Michelle met when they were neighbors. They were neighbors in the same apartment complex that the shooting took place. He lived in number 407 and she lived in number 408. So the two, would see each other in the hallway. He thought she was cute. She thought he was cute. They developed a little bit of a friendship, eventually a relationship. And once they started dating, it got pretty serious pretty fast. And within no time, Paul just moved out of his apartment and into Michelle's apartment with her. Michelle was a sophomore at RMU, which is, the Robert Morris University, after graduating from Shenango area high school in 2006. And she was said to be one of the most energetic and outgoing people. Her friend Sarah said that she was one of the most amazing people that Sarah knew. So it made total sense that Paul would have been drawn to her because she was great and she was also beautiful. In the year before the shooting, things seemed to be good between the couple. Michelle had taken Paul home to meet her family and things seemed to have been going well. Her friends seemed to like him. They said that he was quiet, but he was nice, and they had never seen Michelle more happy than she was with Paul. They said that Michelle and Paul really seemed to love each other. But in the time right before the murders, the 6 months before the murders, Paul started to feel like the relationship wasn't going as well. And he felt like they were at their lowest point, which I don't know if Michelle knew he felt that way. A lot of reporting from her friends doesn't say, but again, there's a lot of missing information, but doesn't say that they were at a low point. But apparently Paul was expressing to his friends that there were issues in the relationship and that they were at a low point. So this is the man. This is the man, Paul, who came home to the apartment he shared with Michelle, found her there studying, just studying for school with Jonathan and Michael, and murdered these two guys. Now, how Michelle knew Michael and Jonathan isn't clear. It's not in the reporting how they met, but I think it's safe to say that they probably knew each other from school and that they were buddies from school, or at least study buddies, because they did have, similar classes. Michelle and Jonathan were even going for the same major, so it makes sense that they would be in classes together and that could be how they know each other. But either way, on this particular evening, they were studying together at her apartment. Now, even though the relationship between Michelle and the two guys and how they know each other is unclear, the relationship between Jonathan and Michael is more clear. They did know each other and they knew each other well. They had actually both went to and graduated from Center Area High School, and the last year of them being in school together is when they really bonded and became close friends. In high school, both of the boys had a lot of friends, and they weren't the type of guys who were in any particular clique. They were just friends with everybody. They were friends with the jocks, the band kids, everybody. And they were the type of, popular people who were also nice. They had this sort of air of innocence about them that really made it shocking when they were killed, because they were these are not the type of kids that something like this happens to. Not that something like this should happen to any kids, but when it's particularly shocking because they're just little good kids that don't get into any trouble. That seems to be what the mood was about the shooting. So with that, let's now talk about who these boys were, and let's start with Michael. Michael was one of 6 children with 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and he was born on December 21st, 1987 in Pittsburgh. Michael was said to be tender-hearted, wholesome, a gentle soul, and a cherished friend. One of his family friends said that the English language does not possess the words to describe the type of special person that Michael was. Michael, who went by the nickname Fudd, by the way, also seemed to be an incredibly intelligent young man. He was the type of person who, when he became interested in a subject, he had to know every single thing about that particular subject. And his friends said that he had encyclopedic knowledge on these topics, from things like Japanese animation to wrestling to the basketball scores and basketball information for Robert Morris University. Apparently it was to the point that people were how does this guy fit all of this information in one brain? At the time of his death, Michael was a junior, and he was an economics major and a member of the college bowl team, which competed in academic challenges against other schools in the Northeast. And after his death, the team decided that they would enter future tournaments in honor of Michael. In addition to being super intelligent, Michael was also very into the extracurriculars, particularly sports. Like he played football in high school, and he would try to make sure to go to as many sporting events as possible, like throughout a year. Like that was his thing. He was also super into wrestling, and he seemed to have a sense of humor because he had like this replica wrestling belt that like the people who win at wrestling, right? He would wear this belt and then like put on a mask to just make people laugh. He just seemed to be doing very well at school. He was happy. He was flourishing. He was even thinking of rushing for a fraternity in the spring, but he wasn't able to because he was murdered. And one of the guys who was in the frat that Michael was going to rush with, I don't know the terminology here, his name was Nick. He said of Michael's murder, and I quote, "Some guys are still in shock. You never know what can happen. It's hard to see how it could have happened because he was such a good kid." By all accounts, he was just said to be incredibly kind. He didn't have like a mean bone in his body. He was very extroverted, and he was the type of person who really cared about his family and his friends. And one of these friends that he really cared about was Jonathan Gilbert. So Jonathan, he was born on February 4th, 1985, and he was the only child to his mother, Lorraine. He, like Michael, was also a junior, and he was an elementary education major who had just transferred from Community College of Beaver County the semester he was killed. He had literally been there 6 days. 6 days when he was killed. It's so sad. And when he started going to the campus, he started rooming with his good friend from high school, Michael, and 2 other boys. Jonathan was known to his friends as Gilly, like his last name Gilbert, they called him Gilly, and he was said to be a very sweet and like fun-loving guy. Even though he had only been at this campus for 6 days, he had made an impression. He was very outgoing and talkative and friendly and just like fit right in with Michael's already established group of friends. Jonathan was also the type of guy who seemed to just want to not have problems, right? His stepfather Tom said that he was the peacemaker of a group, and Tom said specifically of Jonathan, quote, "This kid was such a good kid. This devastates us." Jonathan was a writer. He wrote short plays, like one about a vampire who was forced to be on the Jerry Springer show, which when I tell you, I would love to read that. He was also the type of guy who loved horror movies and Quentin Tarantino movies and comic books. He was like a little bit of an alt kid with long dark hair that he sometimes put streaks of colors in, like blue, and was like this little emo boy wearing a lot of black or goofy clothing and just like doing his own thing. But not doing his own thing in like a loner kind of way, because he wasn't a loner at all. He was very kind and caring, always had a smile on his face. He was said to be the type of guy who wouldn't let anything get him down. He never got in trouble. He always wanted to have fun and would do anything and everything to make the people around him laugh. Now, as I said, he was an elementary education major, and that's because he like loved kids. He even worked at the daycare center on campus, and the kids there called him Mr. Jonathan. And in this job, his like contagious energy, his natural lightness, and like his inherent innocence made him such a good fit for this job and made him like the perfect person to impact these kids' lives. He was also very close with his family, his mom and his grandpa. To read what they said about him after he was gone, like I could cry. They were incredibly close. Like I guess even though he was, in his 20s and an adult and, too cool to hang out with grandpa as a lot of kids get to be, he wasn't like that. He would go to mass with his grandpa every Sunday, or I don't know if it was on Sunday. Every week he would go to mass with his grandpa, and he was like super close with his mom. They were buddies. I guess they even went to college classes together because his mom decided later in life she wanted to go back to school, and so they'd have overlapping classes together, and he wasn't like even embarrassed about this. He loved it. He was very like sweet to his mom. He even cooked for her. He would like make her special meals, and she said that he was the sunshine of her life. She said of her only son, and I quote, "He got along with everybody. That's why I don't understand this whole thing. He would never start a fight with anyone." And that's why the fact that he was a peacemaker and would never start a fight with anyone is why it was so weird to everyone that he would be murdered alongside his friend while at another friend's house just studying. So let's go back to that night now. It's January 22nd, 2008, and Jonathan, Michael, and Michelle are at the apartment that Michelle shares with Paul. They're hanging out, they're studying, they're working on homework together, just, hanging out around the computer. At some point before 11:30 p.m., Paul came back to the apartment. He walked in, he saw Michelle, he saw the two guys, and reportedly he got a gun and then left the apartment. Now, what he did when he left the apartment, we can't be sure. Probably contemplated what he was going to do next, because reportedly he had other plans for what to do with that gun, which we're going to get into later. But either way, he decided to go back into that apartment and open fire on Michelle, Jonathan, and Michael. 20-year-old Michael, who reportedly was on the phone talking to a friend when all of this happened, tried to run. He ended up getting away from the other two, but he was still killed. He was shot 3 times, one of the shots being to his head. Jonathan was found with Michelle, like near Michelle, and he had been shot 5 times, and one of the shots was to his head. And Michelle had been shot over and over. She was shot 7 times in her arm, her torso, and then he held her down, and he too shot her in the head. Now, what's super wild about this case to me, the part that I was like, what are the odds here, is that the night that this happened, police were headed to Paul's apartment before the shots even rang out. They were going there to check on him because apparently he had sent like a text message to a friend that the friend thought was weird and cryptic, because he wrote this friend just saying, quote, Jared was right. And if you recall, Jared was Paul's friend who had recently taken his own life. So when this friend received this text, they were worried that Paul was going to hurt himself, which is what I meant when I said he was probably contemplating what he was going to do because he had other plans for that gun. So this friend, being worried that Paul's going to hurt himself, called the police, told them what happened, and the police were headed to his house to do a welfare check on him when they got the call that shots were being fired. So police get there pretty quick because they were already headed to that building. They get there, they get access, they go up the stairs, they hear the noises of him blocking off the door, they catch him as he jumps off the balcony. He throws his gun, which was loaded, by the way. He had unloaded it when he shot these people, reloaded it. What he was planning to do with it, I don't know, but he was caught. And when he was caught, he was super forthcoming with what he did. He literally told the officers, quote, he killed all 3 of them. That's not a quote. I killed all 3 of them. There's a quote. Because at that time, he thought he had killed Michelle. He didn't realize she had lived. And Paul seemingly did not care at all about what he did. Like when they put him in the back of the police car, he was smiling. He was smashing his head into the plexiglass in the police car. And when they wheeled Michelle out on a stretcher when she was still alive, he just started laughing. And again, this was super weird because this was a guy who had no red flags, apparently, who was in a relationship that seemed good. Apparently there were no signs even that night that this was going to happen. Michelle had been talking to a friend on the phone and everything had seemed fine. Everything had seemed normal. She told her friend oh, Paul's coming home. I love you. I'll talk to you later. And there was nothing in her voice that would indicate to her friend that anything like this was going to happen. It was just seemingly so random. But anyways, Paul was taken into custody and the police are just what happened here? Why did you do this? What happened here? And this is when he sort of changed his tune a little bit. Before he was just admitting outright that he had done it. Now he was kind of getting a little iffy on it. So he tells police that it all started, all he could remember rather, was that he came home to his apartment and he found his fiance in the apartment with 2 men he didn't know, which is debatable. He's saying that they're strangers, but there are reports out there that they were friends, that they had hung out together. He knew these guys is basically the point. They were not strangers to him. But he says he comes in the house, he sees his fiance with 2 men he does not know, and then all he remembers next is the really bad smell of gunpowder. Now, he was asked by police if he really could not remember, because they didn't believe him. They were like, can you not remember, or is it that you don't want to tell us what really happened here? And he said that it was a little bit of both. And then he said of that night, quote, a lot of stuff goes on in my head, and unfortunately, this is the way it turned out. But he did say that if he had the option, he would take back those last couple of minutes. So at least he has some remorse, right? Now, apparently during this interview, Paul had some questions for police himself. Namely, he asked police how many people had died in the apartment. And when they responded with 2, he responded with, quote, at least 2. Which is just a weird response and a weird question considering he said he knew that he killed all 3 people. I don't know, but I just thought that was worth mentioning to you. But either way, he was subsequently arrested. He was charged with 2 counts of criminal homicide, 1 count of attempted homicide, and 1 count of assault, and he was held without bail. So that's what's happening back at the station, right? But of course, officers had to be at the apartment complex processing the scene. So they were down there on the ground, looking up at the balcony where Paul had jumped off. And one of the officers apparently just jumped up, scaled the wall, went up on top of the balcony. And the other officers that were there were like, I don't know parkour, so I guess I'm just going to stack up these toys. Apparently there were like some unspecified children's toys. I'm assuming it was like a jungle gym or something. The reporting doesn't say, it just says that these officers who did not know parkour stacked up the toys and climbed up onto the balcony. And when they went inside, they found the bodies of the 2 murdered men. At this point, Michelle had already been taken away. She was taken to UPMC Mercy Hospital, where she was in critical condition after going through surgery, but she was expected to live. In searching the house in total, police found 13 spent shell casings, and these, which honestly is way less than it could have been, because they also found a gun safe inside the apartment. It was like Paul's gun safe, and inside he had like a bunch of semi-automatics and like some other assault rifles. So he had a lot of stuff he could have done. There could have been a lot more damage here, so luckily he didn't have access to those or didn't think to grab them. Inside they also found a empty magazine that was for the same type, like the same caliber of bullet that was in the gun that Paul had on him when he threw it away when he was arrested. And they also found that there were bullet holes in the walls, but fortunately none of the bullets went through the walls into adjoining apartments and didn't hurt anybody else. Now, when the word of this happening got out, people were stunned because all 3 of these people who were shot were RMU students that were living in an off-campus apartment that really wasn't far from the school. And apparently at this school, the majority of students lived off campus, like the vast majority lived off campus. So it was just hitting super close to home. And people were just like, oh my God, like these young people were shot. And the president of the school sent out an email to everybody saying that he was like shocked and troubled by this tragic loss. The president also addressed like hundreds of students who gathered in the food hall to like mourn the loss of these 2 boys, and told the students that, you know, this was such a horrible thing, and that he planned to go visit Michelle in the hospital and like visit with her family. And he also planned to and did contact the parents of Michael and Jonathan and said that they were, you know, reasonably devastated by what happened, but he wanted to make sure that the families knew that they had all of the support that the school could offer, that they weren't going through this alone. And he said of this, quote, "Our prayers and sympathies go out to the families and friends of these 3 young people, and we hope for a full recovery for Michelle. We are shocked and saddened by this tragic loss to the Robert Morris family." And man, these students were just so shocked too, because everyone who was shot was so young, you know, between 20 and 22 years old. And all of these other students at the school were in the same position. Like they're all adults now technically, but they're all still kids in many ways. And this is their first time like branching out and being independent and going off to school. And then something like this happened. And one of the girls who was present at the gathering to like mourn the boys who were killed said of this, quote, "This is our time to be independent because we're in college and we're adults now. You always think things are going to be safe, but this is a new grown-up world to use. And I guess this is our wake-up call. It's shocking." And it was shocking, man. It was shocking and it was heartbreaking, because now these parents who had just sent their kids off to college, you know what I mean? Like these kids were just in college, were now planning their funerals. And this is particularly heartbreaking because Michael's father, Wayne, was the county coroner, and his family owned like the 2 nearby funeral homes. So Michael's family was going to be handling the aftercare and the arrangements for both of these kids, their kid and their kid's friend. I cannot imagine how tragic and traumatic that would be. And Michael's aunt, who was also a coroner, said of this, quote, "It's heartbreaking that such an innocent child could be taken from our lives so violently." Now the 2 boys, I say boys because they're so young to me, but they are technically men, they are technically adults. Well, their visitation, like for their bodies, was held at the Tatalovich funeral home that was owned by Michael's family. And those who were present at their visitation all wore their colonial shirts and jackets, complete with blue ribbons. And nearly 300 people gathered, and of those people were Jonathan and Michael's other 2 roommates, Ron and Joe. The 4 boys lived together and were said to not just be roommates, but also be family. One of these 2 boys, Ron, actually spoke at the service and said that he just knew that because of Michael's like jokester personality, that he was looking down at him and laughing at him for having to speak at his funeral in this capacity. And these 2 boys suffered like a tangible loss, right? Because they lived together. And I know Jonathan hadn't lived there very long, but he had still made an impression with them. And I guess Jonathan and Michael would like stay up late together and hang out and laugh and watch YouTube videos and keep their roommates up. And now these boys were experiencing like a deafening silence with them not being there. And man, it sounded like a very like solemn but beautiful service for these boys, because like, I mean, Michael's family had been there for the community for years, right? They had helped like countless people on the absolute worst days of their lives. And now they had all of these people coming out doing that for them. There were hundreds of people crammed into this small area to the point that all the pews were totally filled. There were people standing around because there was no room to even sit. But despite having all that support and it being so beautiful, it was still like so fucking sad, because like when Michael's body was being taken out, like when the casket was being taken out of the room, his father, Wayne, was like walking behind it but could barely hold himself up. So his father, Michael's grandfather, had to hold him up and lead him out of the room because he couldn't even do it. And as for Jonathan's mother, Lori, she could barely stand. She couldn't even lift her own body. So she too had to be held by her father, Jonathan's grandfather, and led out of the funeral home because she couldn't walk either. And I just feel so bad for Jonathan's mother, you know, to lose your child and to have it be your only child, your whole world. The two were, again, so close, like going to the same school together and hanging out. And he was the type of kid who was like unashamed. He loved his mother without shame. He had no issue with like giving her a hug, giving her a kiss, telling her that he loved her in front of his friends. And she was the type of mom who knew all of his friends. She was very close with them as well. Their house was like the hangout house, and kids were always there and hanging out on her back porch, watching TV, listening to music. Like, she had such life in her house because of her son, and now all of that was gone. And what's incredibly sad about Jonathan's murder is he was killed just 2 weeks before his 23rd birthday. So his mother, instead of planning him a party, which is what she was planning to do, right? She was going to make him a party, get him a cake, you know, take him out to dinner, plan a snowboarding trip, do all of those things. Instead, she was going to the cemetery to put flowers and balloons on his grave. She said of this, quote, "This is just such a nightmare. I just can't believe he's not here with me. None of this makes any sense." Friends of Jonathan's knew that his mom was struggling, so they made sure to call and check on her often and just make sure she was okay. And she would tell them like she wasn't okay and she didn't know if she was ever going to be okay because she didn't know how to live without him. And it wasn't just her either. Her father, Jonathan's grandfather, was incredibly close with him too. I guess Jonathan considered his grandfather to be like a guider and a mentor to him. And they were just very close. As I said, they would go to church together all the time. They'd go fishing together. And his grandfather said that it was just too hard for him, like mentally, to imagine that he would never hear Jonathan say squeeze as he gave him a giant hug. And then, man, we have Michelle, who survived but was destroyed, right? Like, her family had to learn that that happened to her, sit outside of her hospital room and just hope that she would be okay, that she would live. And then she did, but she was just destroyed. She was paralyzed on the right side of her body. Her hearing was impaired, as was her vision and speech. And when she appeared at trial, she was in a wheelchair. She still had a bullet lodged in her brain. She suffered permanent brain damage. And in trial, she had a shaved head because they had to do reconstructive surgery on her skull to save her. I think they actually had to do 2 surgeries on her skull. And when she showed up, she had like a rainbow leg brace on. And she had long-term effects. She couldn't have a normal life. She couldn't work a normal job. She couldn't drive a car. She couldn't pursue her passion of ballet anymore. She had been in college, but she likely wasn't going to be able to go back. And she still had all these friends who were going to continue on with that life without her. And her friends and her loved ones did their best not to mention this, not to mention the things that she couldn't do, not to bring up school, because they wanted to keep her positive and keep her having hope for the future, even though things were looking pretty bleak for her. She lived, but her life was left a shell of what it had been prior to that day because of the choices that Paul made. Now, let's move forward to the legal part. When Paul was arrested, the prosecution was initially going after the death penalty because he had literally killed 2 people, attempted to kill a 3rd person. She only didn't die because she was incredibly lucky. She was shot 7 times, and he seemingly didn't care about it at all, even laughed when he did it. And about that, in an interview, Paul's attorney said that his client wasn't evil and that some of his reactions, his expressions were misinterpreted. Like the fact that he, laughed when somebody was brought out on a stretcher and smiled after killing people was just his way of handling a stressful situation. And his attorney did apologize and gave his condolences to the families for their losses, but did not admit that his client was guilty, which, it's his job to say he's not. But I don't know. I don't know if I believe that that was Paul's way of handling a stressful situation, that he's not evil, because when the first responding officer testified at the trial about, Paul's arrest and everything like that, he still smiled and smirked. Now, Paul did have a mental health evaluation done, though his attorney did not try to go after, not guilty by reason of insanity, or mental defect. I know it was something that they were considering, but it's not something they went with. And Paul was presented with a deal, but he didn't seem sure if he was going to take the deal. But I feel like he had to have known that his goose was effectively cooked and that he didn't have many options, because even though he waited till the last minute, he did end up taking the deal after he had a conversation with his family. To avoid the death penalty, Paul pled guilty to double homicide. And when this happened, Michelle, his ex-fiancée, his ex-girlfriend, who he had attempted to but failed to kill, was sitting just feet away from him. And she was surrounded by 20 friends and family members, not just of hers, but of the two men that he killed. And when Paul pled guilty, the people around her sobbed, but she sat there like a hard, strong bee with this cold, icy stare through the whole trial. Paul sat there in a dark suit and a mohawk and didn't say anything. He didn't testify in his own defense. He didn't have an explanation for himself. He didn't apologize. He didn't say anything to the friends and family members of the people that he had hurt and the men that he had killed. Michelle did make a victim impact statement, though she didn't read it. She didn't say it herself. She had to have it read by the prosecutor because due to her injuries, she wasn't able to speak. But in this victim impact statement, she described how the man that she had loved held her down and shot her in the head. And while this was being read, she clung to this emotional support panda stuffed animal, which shows she was an adult, yes, but she was still so much a child. So much a child. Still such a child in so many ways. In her statement, she asked Paul a question, and the question was, quote, "Why did he do this to us? Jonathan, Michael, me, our families. It was so stupid and senseless." She added, quote, "I am angry with what he is putting our families through. I will never forgive him for doing this to us." There were also other statements in addition to Michelle's read. There was one read from Michael's father, Wayne, and another, this man named Sean, who was a longtime friend of Jonathan. He had a statement that was read by the prosecutor, but neither of these men were in court. Who was in court was Jonathan's mother, Lori, and she made a statement, and she was able to speak herself. And she said to Paul, quote, "When this evil creature pulled the trigger that night and shot my son, he not only physically killed Jonathan, but he emotionally and spiritually killed me as well. Now, trying to live every day is very difficult. My heart is filled with sorrow. I love my son, and now I have to find a way to live knowing that my son is no longer here." The judge then ultimately sentenced H. Paul Visnansky to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the murders of Michael and Jonathan, and an additional 20 to 40 years for the attempted murder of Michelle. When sentencing him, the judge said to Paul, and I quote, "May God have mercy on your soul. There is none coming from this court, nor should there be." To which I say, mic dropped. And man, I can't speak for both families because there weren't statements made by both families, but I know for Jonathan's mother, this was not justice. She said the only way there would be justice for her would be if Paul died, but he hasn't. And from what I read, he is currently one of the 2,500 inmates incarcerated in Allegheny County. Now for some aftermath. The Robert Morris University created and dedicated a memorial garden to Michael and Jonathan. Well, the spokesperson for the school said that initially the inception of the idea of the garden was inspired by Michael and Jonathan, but since its creation, it has kind of grown and morphed into something more. And now it is a place of remembrance for every member of the Robert Morris community who has died. It's a place to remember all of them. Michael's family has decided that they want to honor their son's kind and generous legacy with a scholarship in his honor. And Michael's father said that his son's murderer is leaving a much different mark. And then he said, and I quote, "Paul's legacy to his family is that he is a murderer with a demented and evil mind. and he will be tormented in jail for the rest of his life. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murders of Michael and Jonathan and the attempted murder of Michelle. I hope you found my telling of this to be informative. I hope it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Michael, Jonathan, and Michelle with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. What do you believe was the motive for the murders of Michael and Jonathan and the attempted murder of Michelle? Like, what happened with Paul to make him change so drastically? Or if you are familiar with this case, is there something that I'm missing in the lack of reporting? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because it feels so random, and I feel like there has to be something more here. Anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with any cases you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And of course, if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. Before I leave, I want to say one last thank you to Dossier for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Dossier that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.